Marcus Thompson stood at the entrance of the sprawling industrial complex, his freshly pressed security uniform still creasing at the joints. At 22, he looked even younger with his clean-shaven face and nervous energy that radiated from every movement. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard as he clutched his orientation packet, reading and rereading the same paragraph about protocol procedures. The Meridian manufacturing facility stretched across 40 acres of prime real estate on the outskirts of Detroit. Known for producing precision automotive components, the company employed over 3,000 workers across 3 shifts. Security was paramount, given the valuable machinery and proprietary technology housed within the multiple buildings. The guard force consisted of 30 experienced officers, most of whom had served in various capacities for over a decade. Marcus had stumbled into this job almost by accident. After dropping out of community college where he'd been studying computer science, he'd bounced between various retail positions and food service jobs. His mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to support them both, had grown increasingly worried about his lack of direction. When she spotted the security job posting at the local employment office, she practically dragged him there to apply. The interview process had been surprisingly straightforward. Captain Rodriguez, the head of security, was a stocky man in his 50s with graying temples and calloused hands. He'd looked Marcus up and down, asked a few basic questions about his background, and seemed satisfied with his clean record and willingness to work nights. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it offered health benefits and the possibility of advancement within the company's security department. "You'll start on the night shift," Captain Rodriguez had explained during that first meeting. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 4 days a week. Your primary responsibility will be monitoring the perimeter and conducting regular patrols of the facility. We've got cameras everywhere, but nothing replaces actual eyes on the ground. Now standing outside the main security office, Marcus could hear voices and laughter emanating from within. He pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, immediately noticing the wall of monitors displaying feeds from dozens of security cameras. 3 men in identical uniforms looked up from their conversation, their expressions shifting from casual friendliness to barely concealed amusement. Well, said the largest of the 3, a man whose nameplate read Stevens. He was built like a linebacker, with arms that strained against his uniform sleeves. Must be the new kid Rodriguez told us about. The second guard, a thin man with premature balding named Patterson, snickered. "Kid's right. What are you, 18? 22, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The third guard, Williams, was somewhere between his colleagues in build, but shared their skeptical expression. 22 and probably never worked security a day in his life, right? Marcus nodded reluctantly. This is my first security position, but I'm eager to learn. Stevens exchanged glances with his colleagues. Eager to learn, he says. That's cute. He stood up, towering over Marcus by at least 6 inches. Tell me, kid, you ever been in any kind of fight? Ever had to deal with someone who didn't want to cooperate? I've never had any serious confrontations, Marcus admitted, feeling his confidence eroding with each passing second. Patterson laughed outright. Oh, this is rich. Rodriguez hired us a pacifist. What happens when some drunk tries to climb the fence? Or when one of the day shift workers gets aggressive about overtime disputes? I'm sure I can handle whatever situations arise, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. Williams shook his head. You sure about that, rookie? Because this isn't some mall security gig where your biggest worry is teenagers shoplifting candy. We've had break-in attempts, aggressive protesters during labor disputes, and more than a few incidents with disgruntled former employees. Stevens moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Marcus. And what about weapons training? You know how to handle a firearm? Marcus felt his stomach drop. During the orientation, he'd been told that guards were required to qualify on the company's firing range within their first 30 days. He'd assumed it would be basic training, nothing too intensive. I've never fired a gun before, but I understand there's training provided. The 3 veteran guards burst into laughter. Patterson actually had to wipe tears from his eyes. Never fired a gun. Oh man, this keeps getting better. Kid, Stevens said, shaking his head. Half our job involves being ready for anything. We're not just here to check badges and write reports. This is serious work that requires serious people, Williams added. The range qualification isn't some joke. You need to demonstrate real proficiency, Some of the guys here were military, others grew up hunting. You're going to be competing against people who've been shooting since they could hold a rifle. Marcus felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment, but he forced himself to stand straighter. I understand the requirements, and I'm committed to meeting them. Committed, Patterson repeated mockingly. That's adorable. Tell you what, rookie, why don't you shadow Stevens tonight? Maybe you'll get a taste of what real security work involves. Stevens grinned, clearly enjoying the situation. Sure thing. Hope you're ready for a long night, kid. And maybe tomorrow we can take you to the range, let you embarrass yourself properly. As the shift began, Marcus followed Stevens through the facility's darkened corridors. The veteran guard made no effort to explain procedures or offer helpful advice. Instead, he seemed to take pleasure in pointing out potential dangers and highlighting Marcus's inexperience at every opportunity. See that loading dock? Stevens pointed to a shadowy area near the rear of the building. Last month, we caught 3 guys trying to steal copper wiring from the electrical room. One of them had a knife. Think you could handle something like that? Marcus remained silent, focusing on memorizing the layout and trying to absorb as much as possible despite the hostile environment. He knew he was being tested, hazed in the way that newcomers often were in close-knit groups. But the constant reminders of his inexperience, particularly regarding firearms, gnawed at his confidence. By the end of his first shift, Marcus felt physically and emotionally drained. The other guards had made their position clear. He was an outsider, a liability, someone who didn't belong in their world of experienced professionals. As he drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake taking this job, but something else stirred within him too, a stubborn determination that his mother had often remarked upon. Marcus Thompson might be inexperienced, but he wasn't going to let a few bullies define his future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he intended to face them head-on. The next evening brought no relief for Marcus. If anything, the harassment intensified as word spread through the security department about the college dropout who'd never held a gun. During the shift briefing, Captain Rodriguez announced the schedule for range qualifications, and Marcus felt every eye in the room focus on him with barely concealed anticipation. Thompson, Rodriguez called out, consulting his clipboard. You're scheduled for Friday morning. That gives you 3 days to familiarize yourself with basic firearm safety. Stevens, I want you to take him through the fundamentals. Stevens' grin was predatory. My pleasure, Captain. I'll make sure our rookie gets all the preparation he needs. The other guards exchanged knowing looks. Patterson whispered something to Williams that made both men chuckle. Marcus pretended not to notice, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just typical workplace hazing. These men genuinely seemed to want him to fail. Over the next 2 nights, Stevens put Marcus through what could only be described as a crash course in humiliation. Every training session became an opportunity to demonstrate how unprepared the young man was for serious security work. In the basement training room, Stevens would set up scenarios designed to highlight Marcus's inexperience. All right, rookie, Stevens would say. Pretend I'm an intruder who just jumped the fence. What's your first move? Marcus would attempt to respond professionally, but Stevens would immediately interrupt. Wrong, you're thinking like a civilian. In real security work, you need to assess threats instantly, maintain situational awareness, and be ready to use force if necessary. The criticism was relentless and often contradictory. When Marcus tried to be assertive, Stevens accused him of being reckless. When he attempted a more measured approach, he was labeled weak and indecisive. The other guards would often gather to watch these training sessions, treating them like entertainment. Williams seemed to take particular pleasure in questioning Marcus's physical capabilities. Security work isn't just about following procedures, he would say. Sometimes you need to physically restrain someone or chase down a suspect. You think those skinny arms of yours are going to hold up when things get real? Patterson focused on psychological warfare, constantly reminding Marcus of high-stakes situations he might face. What happens when you're doing a night patrol and you hear glass breaking? What if you round a corner and there's a guy with a crowbar? You going to talk him to death? Despite the hostile environment, Marcus absorbed every piece of information he could gather. He studied the facility's layout obsessively, memorizing every camera angle, every potential entry point, every emergency protocol. He read security manuals during his breaks and watched training videos online. His determination to succeed seemed to only irritate his colleagues more. "Look at him," Patterson remarked one night as Marcus reviewed incident reports from previous months. "Acting like he's studying for finals. This isn't school, kid. Real security work happens in the moment, when your adrenaline is pumping and you've got to make split-second decisions." The worst part was that Marcus could see kernels of truth in their criticism. He was inexperienced. He had no background in confrontation or crisis management, and he genuinely didn't know how he would react in a genuinely dangerous situation. But their approach felt designed to break him down rather than build him up. On Wednesday night, things escalated when a minor incident occurred during their shift. A delivery truck had arrived outside normal hours, and the driver was insistent about unloading his cargo immediately. The man was agitated, possibly under the influence of something, and became increasingly aggressive when told he would need to wait until morning. Stevens handled the situation with the practiced ease of someone who dealt with similar problems hundreds of times before. He remained calm but firm, used precise verbal de-escalation techniques, and eventually convinced the driver to leave without incident. It was an impressive display of professional competence. "See that, rookie?" Stevens said afterward. "That's what real security work looks like. You need to read people, control the situation, and project authority even when you're dealing with someone who might be dangerous." Marcus had to admit he'd been impressed by Stevens's handling of the situation. The veteran guard had demonstrated exactly the kind of skills that Marcus lacked. But instead of using the incident as a teaching moment, Stevens and the others spent the rest of the shift speculating about how badly Marcus would have handled the same situation. "Kid probably would have called his mommy," Patterson joked, "or asked the guy nicely to please consider coming back tomorrow," Williams added. Marcus remained silent, but internally he was taking notes. He observed how Stevens had positioned himself during the confrontation, the tone of voice he'd used, the way he'd maintained physical readiness without appearing overtly threatening. These were learnable skills, even if his colleagues seemed determined not to teach them. Thursday night brought the final training session before his range qualification. Stevens led him to a small room adjacent to the security office where the department kept its training materials. The walls were covered with posters about proper firearms handling, emergency procedures, and legal guidelines for security personnel. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to embarrass yourself," Stevens said bluntly, "but I'm supposed to make sure you at least understand basic safety. So listen up." The instruction that followed was technically accurate but delivered with barely concealed contempt. Stevens explained the fundamentals of firearm safety, demonstrated proper grip and stance, and reviewed the basic mechanics of the pistols used by the security department. But every lesson came with commentary designed to undermine Marcus's confidence. "This is a Glock 17, Stevens explained, handling the weapon with practiced familiarity. "Standard 9mm service pistol. Simple enough that even civilians can usually figure it out. You'll be shooting at paper targets from various distances, starting at 7 yards and moving back to 25 yards. Marcus paid careful attention as Stevens demonstrated the proper stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, strong side foot slightly back, lean into it but don't overcorrect. Most rookies either try to muscle the gun or treat it like it's going to bite them. "What's considered a passing score?" Marcus asked. Stevens laughed. "You need to hit the target 70% of the time to qualify. But honestly, kid, most of the guys here shoot in the high 80s or 90s. Anything below 80% and you'll be the laughingstock of the department." As the training session concluded, Stevens' expression grew more serious. "Look, Thompson, I'm going to level with you. This job isn't for everyone. There's no shame in admitting you're not cut out for it. Maybe you should consider going back to school, finding something more suited to your temperament." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, but I intend to pass the qualification tomorrow." "Intention and ability are two different things," Stevens replied. "But we'll see, won't we?" As Marcus drove home that morning, his mind raced with everything he'd learned over the past few days. The constant criticism and mockery had been difficult to endure, but it had also revealed important information about what would be expected of him. He understood now that this wasn't just about learning a job, it was about proving he belonged in a world where respect was earned through competence under pressure. The range qualification would be his first real test, and Marcus suspected it would determine not just whether he kept his job, but whether he would ever gain acceptance from his colleagues. As he pulled into his driveway, he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would give it everything he had. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Marcus's mood as he drove to the company's training facility. The range was located in a separate building about 10 minutes from the main complex, nestled between warehouses in an industrial district that seemed designed to muffle the sound of gunfire. Marcus had barely slept, his mind cycling through everything Stevens had taught him about stance, grip, and sight alignment. The training facility's lobby was sparse, a few chairs, motivational posters about safety and professionalism, and a trophy case displaying awards from various security competitions. Marcus signed in with the receptionist, a middle-aged woman who looked at him with the same mixture of pity and curiosity he'd grown accustomed to over the past week. "First time qualifying?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, good luck, honey. Just try to relax and remember what they taught you." The range instructor, a weathered man named Kowalski, emerged from a back office carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen countless nervous rookies over the years. He was compact and moved with the precise efficiency of a career military man, though his graying beard suggested those days were long behind him. "Thompson?" Kowalski's voice carried a slight Eastern European accent. "You're here for initial qualification. Ever fired a handgun before?" "No, sir." Kowalski nodded as if this confirmed something disappointing. "All right, we'll start with safety review, then move to the range. Standard qualification course, 50 rounds at varying distances. You need 35 hits in the scoring zones to pass." They were joined by two other guards Marcus recognized from the facility, Henderson and Clark, both scheduled for their annual requalification. Henderson was a quiet man in his 40s, who'd always treated Marcus with polite indifference. Clark was younger, maybe 30, and had seemed less hostile than Stevens' crew but hadn't exactly been welcoming either. "Morning, rookie," Clark said with a nod. "Big day for you." Henderson just grunted in acknowledgement, clearly focused on his own preparation. The safety briefing took 20 minutes, covering everything from basic gun handling to range rules to emergency procedures. Marcus absorbed every word, knowing that any mistake would be magnified and remembered. Kowalski's instruction was professional but impersonal. He'd clearly given this speech thousands of times before. "Remember," Kowalski concluded, "the weapon is always loaded, never pointed at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot, and be sure of your target and what's beyond it." Simple rules that keep people alive. They moved to the range itself, a long room with concrete walls and individual shooting lanes separated by thick barriers. The familiar smell of gunpowder and cleaning solvent hung in the air. Targets hung at the 7-yard line, human silhouettes with clearly marked scoring zones. Henderson and Clark took their positions at lanes 1 and 2, handling their weapons with the casual confidence of experienced shooters. Marcus was assigned to lane 3, where Kowalski handed him a Glock 17 identical to the one Stevens had shown him during training. "Load 15 rounds, Kowalski instructed, handing Marcus a magazine. "We'll start at 7 yards, then move back to 15 and 25. Take your time. Focus on the fundamentals." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he loaded the magazine, hyper-aware that his every movement was being observed. The ammunition felt heavier than he'd expected, each brass cartridge clicking into place with mechanical precision. He inserted the magazine into the pistol's grip and felt the weapon's weight settle in his hands. "Ready?" Kowalski asked. Marcus nodded, though he felt anything but ready. "Range is hot," Kowalski announced. "Fire when ready." Henderson and Clark began shooting immediately, their weapons barking in steady rhythm. The sound was much louder than Marcus had anticipated, even with hearing protection. He forced himself to block out the distraction and focus on his own target. Stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, strong side foot back. Grip. High and tight with the support hand wrapped around the strong hand. Sight alignment. Line up the front sight with the rear notch. Center it on the target. Marcus squeezed the trigger slowly, just as Stevens had demonstrated. The gun jumped in his hands much more violently than he'd expected. He looked downrange but couldn't see where his shot had hit. "Don't worry about it," Kowalski said. "First shot's always a mystery. Keep going." But something strange happened as Marcus continued firing. After the initial shock of the weapon's recoil and noise, he began to settle into a rhythm. His breathing steadied, his grip became more natural, and the sights seemed to align almost automatically. By his 10th shot, he was beginning to feel something approaching confidence. "Time," Kowalski called after the first 15 rounds. "Make safe and step back." Marcus engaged the safety and set the weapon down, his ears ringing despite the protection. Kowalski walked down range to examine the targets while the 3 guards waited in silence. Henderson and Clark were discussing their performance in low voices, but Marcus couldn't make out their words over the ringing in his ears. When Kowalski returned, he was frowning at his clipboard. Henderson 14 out of 15 in the scoring zones. Clark 13 out of 15. Both solid performances. He paused and looked at Marcus. Thompson 14 out of 15. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Not bad for a first-timer." Clark looked genuinely surprised. "You sure you've never done this before?" Marcus shook his head, though he was as surprised as anyone. The target felt natural. The weapon had begun to feel like an extension of his hands, and something about the precise mechanics of shooting appealed to the same part of his mind that had always excelled at detail-oriented tasks. "Could be beginner's luck," Kowalski said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Let's move back to 15 yards." The second string of fire went even better. Marcus found himself settling into the shot more quickly, his muscle memory already adapting to the weapon's characteristics. The target seemed clear and distinct through the sight picture, and he began to develop an intuitive sense of trigger control. When Kowalski examined the targets this time, his frown had deepened into something approaching confusion. Henderson 12 out of 15. Clark 11 out of 15. Another pause. Thompson 15 out of 15. The range fell silent except for the ventilation system's steady hum. Henderson and Clark exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret. Kowalski studied the target again as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "That's unusual," the instructor said finally. "Most people's accuracy decreases as the distance increases, especially on their first attempt." Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and bewilderment. He'd expected to struggle, to embarrass himself, just as Stevens and the others had predicted. Instead, something about this felt completely natural, like he'd been doing it for years rather than minutes. "Final string," Kowalski announced, walking them back to the 25-yard line. "This is where it gets challenging." At the longer distance, the targets appeared much smaller, and Marcus could hear Henderson and Clark muttering about the difficulty. But as he raised his weapon and found his sight picture, the target seemed to expand in his vision. His breathing slowed automatically. His trigger finger moved with increasing precision, and each shot felt like a natural extension of his intention. The 15 shots seemed to fire themselves, each one feeling perfect as it left the barrel. Marcus was vaguely aware of Henderson and Clark finishing their strings, but his focus was entirely consumed by the simple, pure mechanics of accurate shooting. When Kowalski examined the final targets, he stood motionless for nearly a minute. When he returned to the firing line, his expression was one of complete bewilderment. Henderson, 9 out of 15, still passing overall. Clark, 8 out of 15, also passing. He looked directly at Marcus. Thompson, 15 out of 15. Henderson whistled low. "Jesus, kid, that's 44 out of 45 total. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't think I've ever shot that clean." Clark was shaking his head. 44 out of 45 on your first time? That's not beginner's luck. That's something else entirely. Kowalski was studying Marcus with new interest. "Son, are you absolutely certain you've never fired a weapon before? No military service, no hunting experience, no range time at all?" "Never," Marcus replied honestly. "This is the first time I've touched a gun." The instructor was quiet for a long moment. "In 30 years of training security personnel, I've never seen anything like this. Your natural ability is extraordinary." As they packed up their equipment, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief at passing the qualification, certainly, but also confusion about his unexpected performance. He'd always been detail-oriented, good with his hands, but this seemed to transcend normal skill development. Henderson approached him as they prepared to leave. "Kid, I don't know what you've got, but you better be ready for some attention when word gets around. What you just did doesn't happen." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood what Henderson meant. All he knew was that holding that weapon, lining up those shots, had felt more natural than anything he'd ever done before. As they drove back to the main facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed, though he couldn't yet comprehend what that might mean for his future. By Monday evening, news of Marcus's extraordinary performance at the range had spread through the security department like wildfire. What should have been a routine qualification had become the subject of intense speculation and disbelief. Marcus arrived for his shift to find the atmosphere in the security office had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been dismissive mockery, now there was suspicious scrutiny. Stevens was waiting for him at the security desk, his usual smirk replaced by a more complex expression that mixed skepticism with something approaching concern. Patterson and Williams flanked him, their previous amusement notably absent. Even guards from other shifts had apparently made excuses to be present for Marcus's arrival. Well, Stevens said slowly. Look who decided to show up. The department's new sharpshooter. Marcus set down his gear bag and tried to read the room. The energy felt different, less openly hostile but somehow more intense. Several guards were studying him with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for potential threats. I heard an interesting story from Kowalski. Captain Rodriguez emerged from his office, coffee mug in hand. Something about a perfect score at 25 yards, on a first qualification. It wasn't perfect, Marcus corrected quietly. 44 out of 45, Patterson snorted. Oh, excuse us. Only missed one shot. How embarrassing. But Rodriguez was studying Marcus with professional interest rather than mockery. Kowalski's been running that range for 3 decades. He called me personally to report your performance. Says he's never seen natural ability like that. Williams stepped forward, his expression skeptical. Natural ability, my ass. Nobody shoots like that without training. Serious training. Are you suggesting I lied about my experience? Marcus asked, feeling a flash of anger. I'm suggesting, Williams replied evenly, that people don't just pick up a gun for the first time and outscore 20-year veterans. It doesn't work that way. Stevens nodded slowly. Kid's got a point, Captain. Either Thompson here has been lying about his background or... He trailed off, leaving the implications hanging. Or what? Rodriguez asked. Or something else is going on, Stevens finished. Maybe family background he didn't mention. Military training he forgot to put on his application. Hell, maybe he's been practicing somewhere else and didn't think it was worth mentioning. Marcus felt the weight of their collective suspicion. I've told you everything about my background. I've never fired a weapon before Friday morning. I don't know why I shot well, but I'm not hiding anything. Henderson appeared in the doorway, having apparently been summoned by the commotion. I was there, he said simply. Watched the whole thing. Kid's telling the truth about never handling a weapon before. You could see it in how he loaded the magazine, how he reacted to the recoil. But his shooting, Henderson shook his head. I've never seen anything like it. Could be some kind of savant thing, suggested Clark, who had also arrived. Like those people who can do complex math in their heads or memorize entire phone books. Maybe he's got some kind of natural spatial ability. Patterson wasn't buying it. This isn't math class. Shooting requires muscle memory, breathing control, trigger discipline, things you develop over time. You don't just wake up one day and discover you're Annie Oakley. The speculation continued for several minutes with various theories proposed and debated. Some guards suggested Marcus had military family who might have taught him unofficially. Others wondered if he'd been involved in competitive shooting sports he'd forgotten to mention. A few even proposed more exotic explanations involving natural hand-eye coordination or some kind of genetic predisposition. Through it all, Marcus remained silent, increasingly uncomfortable with being the center of so much attention. He'd expected his good performance to earn him some grudging respect, not transform him into an object of suspicion and debate. Finally, Rodriguez raised his hand for silence. Regardless of how or why it happened, Thompson has demonstrated exceptional marksmanship ability. From a department perspective, that's an asset. He looked directly at Marcus. But I need to be absolutely certain about your background. Any undisclosed military service, police training, competitive shooting experience, anything that might explain this level of performance. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Captain, I understand why this seems unusual, but I've been completely honest about my experience. The only shooting I've ever done was Friday morning at the qualification range. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but I'm going to verify your background more thoroughly. If there's anything you haven't told us, now would be the time. There's nothing to verify, Marcus replied. I am who I said I am. As the group began to disperse, Stevens approached Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read. Thompson, I'm going to be honest with you. What happened Friday doesn't make sense. In my experience, when something doesn't make sense, it's usually because somebody's not telling the whole truth. Maybe your experience isn't as comprehensive as you think, Marcus replied. Surprising himself with his directness, Stevens' eyes narrowed. Careful, rookie. Just because you can hit a paper target doesn't mean you're ready for this job. Shooting's only one part of security work, and it might not even be the most important part. I never said it was, Marcus replied, but it's the part you've all been most concerned about. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Williams stepped closer to Stevens, clearly ready to escalate the confrontation. But Henderson intervened, placing a hand on Williams's shoulder. Easy, Henderson said quietly. Kid's right. We've been giving him grief about shooting, and now he's proven he can handle it. Maybe we should focus on what really matters. Which is, Stevens asked. Whether he can do the job when things get serious, Henderson replied. Shooting qualifications are one thing. Real-world performance is something else entirely. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Henderson's right. Thompson, you've demonstrated exceptional marksmanship ability, but that's just one component of effective security work. Over the next few weeks, we'll be evaluating your performance in all areas. As the shift began, Marcus found himself paired with Henderson for patrol duties. The older guard had requested the assignment, much to Stevens' obvious displeasure. As they walked the facility's perimeter, Henderson proved to be a different kind of training partner than Marcus had experienced before. Listen, kid, Henderson said as they checked the loading dock area. What happened at the range has got people talking. Some of them think you're hiding something. Others think you're some kind of freak of nature. Either way, you've got a target on your back now. A target? Henderson nodded grimly. Stevens and his crew were content to write you off as incompetent. Now they're not sure what to make of you, and that makes them nervous. Nervous people can be dangerous. They continued their patrol in relative silence, Marcus absorbing this new reality. He'd hoped that proving his competence would earn acceptance, but instead it seemed to have created new problems. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as they completed their circuit of the main building. Shoot. Do you think there's something wrong with shooting well on the first try? Henderson considered the question carefully. Wrong? No. Unusual? Absolutely. I've been around guns my whole life, military, hunting, 20 years in security. What you did Friday was extraordinary. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it definitely means you're going to get attention. What kind of attention? The kind that means people will be watching everything you do, looking for explanations. Some will be hoping you succeed. Others will be waiting for you to fail. Henderson paused by a security camera and adjusted its angle slightly. Question is, what are you going to do with that attention? Marcus thought about it as they continued their rounds. He'd stumbled into this job almost accidentally, looking for nothing more than steady pay and benefits. Now less than a week in, he found himself at the center of departmental controversy because of an ability he didn't understand and hadn't asked for. Just want to do my job, he said finally. Henderson smiled for the first time since Marcus had known him. That's probably the smartest thing anyone said about this whole situation. Just remember, doing your job well is going to mean a lot more than hitting targets. And some of the people watching you aren't necessarily hoping you'll succeed. As they finished their patrol and returned to the security office, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed. A week ago, he'd been the incompetent rookie everyone expected to fail. Now he was the mysterious newcomer with unexplained abilities that made experienced guards nervous. He wasn't sure which position was more dangerous. 3 weeks after the range qualification, Marcus had settled into an uneasy routine. His shooting performance remained a topic of conversation, but the initial intensity of speculation had given way to wary acceptance. Some guards, like Henderson and Clark, had begun treating him as a competent colleague. Others, particularly Stevens' group, maintained their distance while watching for any sign of weakness or deception. Marcus had taken Henderson's advice to heart, focusing on mastering every aspect of security work beyond marksmanship. He'd memorized emergency procedures, studied threat assessment protocols, and practiced his radio communication until it became second nature. He'd learned to read body language, understand the subtle signs that indicated when someone might be concealing something or preparing to cause trouble. The facility's rhythm had become familiar to him, the changing of shifts, the patterns of delivery trucks, the different personalities among the day workers who streamed through the gates each morning. He'd begun to feel like he truly belonged, despite the lingering undercurrent of suspicion from some of his colleagues. That sense of belonging was shattered on a cold Tuesday night in November. Marcus was working the late shift with Patterson, a pairing that Rodriguez had begun using more frequently despite Patterson's obvious reluctance. The night had been routine, quiet patrols, regular check-ins, nothing more exciting than a delivery driver who'd taken a wrong turn and needed directions back to the highway. At 2:17 a.m., everything changed. The first sign of trouble came through the radio chatter from the main gate. Jenkins, the guard stationed there, reported a van that had pulled up to the visitors' parking area and hadn't moved for nearly 20 minutes. The vehicle's occupants were still inside, but they'd made no attempt to approach the building or identify themselves. Probably just someone making a phone call, Patterson muttered, but he increased the pace of their patrol slightly. 5 minutes later, Jenkins's voice crackled through the radio again, this time with unmistakable tension. "Control, I've got 3 subjects exiting the van. They're approaching the fence line on the north side, away from the main entrance." Rodriguez's voice came through immediately. "All units, we have a potential perimeter breach in progress. Patterson and Thompson, you're closest to the north fence. Respond and observe. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as they changed direction toward the north side of the facility. Patterson was moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd dealt with similar situations before, his hand resting casually on his radio, while his eyes scanned the darkness ahead. "First rule," Patterson said quietly as they approached the area, "we observe and report. We don't play hero unless lives are in immediate danger." They reached the north fence line just as 3 figures in dark clothing were cutting through the chain link with bolt cutters. The intruders were working quickly and quietly, clearly experienced at this type of operation. One served as a lookout while the other 2 focused on creating an opening large enough to pass through. Patterson keyed his radio. "Control, Patterson here. Visual confirmation of 3 subjects breaching the north fence. They're using cutting tools and appear to be gaining entry." "Copy that," Rodriguez responded. "Local PD has been notified, ETA 15 minutes. Continue observation." But even as Patterson was speaking, the situation escalated. The lookout spotted them and shouted a warning to his companions. All 3 intruders immediately began moving toward the breach they'd created, but instead of fleeing back toward their van, they pushed through the fence and onto company property. "They're on the grounds," Patterson reported urgently, moving toward Building C. Building C housed some of the facility's most sensitive manufacturing equipment, including several $1 million worth of precision machinery that would be valuable on the black market. More concerning, it also contained chemicals and materials that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with crisp authority. "All available units converge on Building C, Patterson. Thompson, maintain visual contact, but do not engage unless they present an immediate threat to personnel. Or attempt to access restricted areas." Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him as they followed the intruders through the darkness. His heart was pounding, but his mind felt crystal clear, processing details with the same precision he'd experienced during his shooting qualification. He noted their movement patterns, estimated their physical capabilities, and began calculating potential response scenarios. The 3 intruders reached Building C and immediately began working on a service door with what appeared to be electronic lock-picking equipment. They were clearly professionals, not opportunistic thieves looking for easy targets. "They're attempting to breach Building C," Patterson reported. "Looks like sophisticated entry tools. Copy. Hold position until backup arrives." But as Patterson was speaking, Marcus noticed movement in his peripheral vision. A 4th figure was approaching from the east, apparently having circled around while they were focused on the main group. This new threat was carrying what looked like a crowbar and was heading directly toward the building's emergency exit. "Patterson," Marcus whispered urgently. 4th subject coming from the east side. Patterson turned to look just as the 4th intruder reached the emergency door and began forcing it open. The alarm that should have sounded was silent. They'd apparently disabled the security system somehow. "Control, we have a 4th subject." They're breaching the emergency exit on the east side of Building C. Rodriguez's response was immediate and tense. Backup is still 8 minutes out. You need to prevent access to the restricted areas. Use your discretion, but be careful. Patterson looked at Marcus, and for the first time since they'd known each other, there was no mockery or condescension in his expression. Kid, this is where it gets real. These guys are professionals and they're after something specific. We need to contain them until backup arrives. Marcus nodded, surprised by his own steadiness. What's the plan? We split up. I'll take the main group by the service door. You handle the guy at the emergency exit. Your job is to prevent him from getting deeper into the building. Challenge him verbally first, but if he doesn't comply... Patterson touched his service weapon. You do what you have to do. As they separated, Marcus felt the weight of his responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was the test that Stevens had predicted, the moment when his ability to hit paper targets would be measured against real-world performance under pressure. He approached the emergency exit carefully, using the shadows and structural elements for concealment. The fourth intruder had successfully forced the door and was now inside the building, moving with purpose toward the manufacturing floor where the most valuable equipment was stored. Security, Marcus called out, his voice carrying more authority than he'd expected. Stop where you are. The intruder spun around, crowbar raised, clearly prepared for confrontation. In the dim emergency lighting, Marcus could see he was a large man, probably in his 30s, with the build and bearing of someone accustomed to violence. Get out of my way, kid, the man growled. You don't want any part of this. Marcus drew his weapon, the familiar weight settling into his hands with surprising comfort. I can't let you proceed. Put down the weapon and exit the building. The intruder laughed, but there was tension beneath the sound. You think you're going to shoot me over some fancy machines? You don't have it in you. For a moment, Marcus wondered if the man was right. Could he actually use his weapon against another human being? All his training had been against paper targets, static and harmless. This was a living person, dangerous but still human. But as the intruder took a step toward him, crowbar raised threateningly, Marcus felt the same clarity and focus that had guided him during his qualification. His breathing steadied, his grip naturally found the proper position, and his sight picture aligned with automatic precision. Stop, Marcus said quietly. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. Something in his voice, or perhaps in his posture, made the intruder pause. The man looked more carefully at Marcus, seemed to register the steadiness of his weapon, the confidence in his stance. You really think you can hit me from there? The intruder asked, but his voice had lost some of its aggressive edge. Marcus didn't respond verbally. Instead, he made a slight adjustment to his aim and fired a single shot that struck the intruder's crowbar, sending it spinning from his hands with a metallic clang that echoed through the building. The man stared at his empty hands in shock. Jesus Christ. Next one won't be a warning, Marcus said calmly. Get on the ground, hands behind your head. The intruder complied immediately, all fight gone out of him. As Marcus secured the situation and called for backup, he could hear similar confrontations playing out elsewhere in the building. Patterson's voice came through the radio reporting that the other 3 subjects were in custody. By the time the police arrived, all 4 intruders had been apprehended without serious injury. As Marcus gave his statement to the investigating officers, he noticed the way his colleagues were looking at him, not with suspicion or mockery, but with something approaching awe. Stevens approached him as the police were loading the suspects into their vehicles. Thompson, he said slowly, I owe you an apology. What you did tonight, that shot with the crowbar, that wasn't just good shooting. That was decision-making under pressure. Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had happened. I just did what needed to be done. No, Stevens replied. You did what very few people could have done, and you did it perfectly. As the excitement died down and the facility returned to normal operations, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed. The test that everyone had been waiting for had finally come, and he'd passed in a way that no one could question or explain away. But more than that, he'd discovered something about himself that went beyond simple marksmanship ability. Under pressure, faced with a real threat, he'd found a level of calm and precision that seemed to transcend normal human capabilities. Whatever this gift was, it was becoming clear that his future would be shaped by it in ways he was only beginning to understand. The morning after the break-in incident, Marcus arrived at work to find his world had changed completely. Word of his performance during the confrontation had spread not just through the security department, but throughout the entire facility. The precision shot that had disarmed the intruder without causing injury had become the stuff of legend, growing in the telling until some versions had him performing impossible feats of marksmanship. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for him in the security office, along with two men in expensive suits whom Marcus didn't recognize. The atmosphere was formal, almost ceremonial, a sharp contrast to the casual environment he'd grown accustomed to. "Thompson," Rodriguez said, standing as Marcus entered, "I'd like you to meet Mr. Harrison from Corporate Security and Mr. Chen from Meridian's Board of Directors." Harrison was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Chen was younger, probably in his 40s, with an intense gaze and the kind of focused energy that suggested high-level executive experience. "Marcus," Harrison said, extending his hand, "I've heard remarkable things about your performance last night. Mind if we sit down and talk?" They moved to Rodriguez's office, where Chen took the lead in the conversation. "Mr. Thompson, what you accomplished last night goes well beyond standard security work. The precision required to disarm someone with a handgun, in low-light conditions, under extreme stress, that's the kind of ability we see in very specialized professionals." Marcus felt a familiar discomfort with being the center of attention. "I just did what the situation required, sir." Harrison leaned forward. "That's exactly why we're here. Most security guards in that situation would have either let the suspect go or been forced to use lethal force. You found a third option that neutralized the threat without causing permanent harm. That shows remarkable judgment in addition to extraordinary skill. The corporate office has been briefed on the incident," Chen added. "They're very impressed not just with your marksmanship, but with your decision-making under pressure. We'd like to discuss some opportunities that might be of interest to you." Rodriguez, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Marcus, what they're talking about is a transfer to corporate security. Different responsibilities, significant pay increase, advanced training opportunities." Marcus felt his world tilting slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm still learning this job." "I've only been here a month," Harrison smiled. "Mr. Thompson, in my 30 years in security work, I've never seen natural ability like yours. With proper training and development, you could be working at the highest levels of corporate protection within a few years." "What exactly would that involve?" Marcus asked. Chen opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. "Executive protection, facility security for high-value installations, threat assessment and response. The kind of work that requires both exceptional skills and absolute discretion. The training would be intensive," Harrison added. "Advanced firearms instruction, tactical movement, emergency medical training, threat psychology. We're talking about a completely different level of professional development." Marcus studied the documents Chen had provided. The salary figures were impressive, more than triple what he was currently making. The benefits package included education assistance, specialized training programs, and advancement opportunities that could lead to positions he'd never imagined. "I need to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Of course," Chen replied, "but I should mention that opportunities like this don't come along often. Your performance last night demonstrated capabilities that most people spend years trying to develop. We'd hate to see that potential go to waste." After the corporate representatives left, Rodriguez sat back in his chair and studied Marcus carefully. "You know what they're really offering you, don't you?" "A career change?" Rodriguez shook his head. "They're offering you a chance to find out what you're really capable of. Last night was just the beginning, Marcus. What you did with that crowbar shot, that wasn't just good marksmanship. That was something special. It felt natural," Marcus admitted, "like the weapon was an extension of my thoughts. That's what I'm talking about. Most people have to train for years to develop that kind of integration between intention and action. You seem to have it naturally." When Marcus emerged from Rodriguez's office, he found the security department had been transformed into something resembling a reception area. Guards from all shifts had gathered, ostensibly for the regular briefing but clearly motivated by curiosity about the previous night's events. Stevens approached him first, his earlier hostility completely replaced by something approaching reverence. "Thompson, I need to say something. I've been in security for 15 years and I've never seen anything like what you did last night." Patterson nodded emphatically. "That shot with the crowbar, I've been telling everyone about it, but they don't believe me. Nobody shoots like that under pressure. The word is you're being recruited for corporate, Williams added. Is it true? Marcus found himself uncomfortable with the attention, but he recognized that his relationship with these men had fundamentally changed. Where once they'd seen him as an incompetent outsider, now they regarded him with the kind of respect usually reserved for proven professionals. Nothing's decided yet, he said carefully. Henderson appeared at his shoulder. Can I give you some advice? They stepped aside from the main group. Henderson's expression was serious, almost paternal. Whatever they offered you, it's probably a good opportunity, Henderson said quietly. But remember that opportunities come with expectations. The higher you go in this business, the more dangerous the situations become. What do you mean? Corporate security isn't like facility protection. You're dealing with serious threats, kidnapping attempts, industrial espionage, organized crime. The people you'd be protecting have enemies with resources and motivation. Your natural ability is impressive, but it might not be enough to keep you alive in that world. Marcus considered this soberly. Are you saying I shouldn't take the position? I'm saying you should understand what you're getting into. Last night was one intruder with a crowbar. Corporate protection could mean dealing with trained professionals who shoot back. As his shift began, Marcus found himself working alongside Clark, who'd specifically requested the pairing. Unlike his previous partners, Clark seemed genuinely interested in understanding how Marcus approached security work. Walk me through what happened last night, Clark said as they began their patrol. From your perspective. Marcus described the incident, trying to articulate the strange clarity he'd felt during the confrontation. When I saw him with the crowbar, everything seemed to slow down. I could see exactly where I needed to place the shot, how much pressure to apply to the trigger, what the result would be. Clark listened intently. That's what they call the zone in sports. Some athletes describe similar experiences, time slowing down, perfect clarity of intention. But most people never experience it under life or death pressure. It didn't feel extraordinary at the time, Marcus said. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. That's what makes it extraordinary. For most people, that kind of situation triggers panic, tunnel vision, degraded motor skills. You experience the opposite, enhanced performance under stress. They completed their patrol in contemplative silence, both men clearly thinking about the implications of Marcus's unusual abilities. As they returned to the security office, Clark made an observation that would stick with Marcus for days to come. You know, there are people who spend their entire careers trying to develop what you seem to have naturally. Military snipers, competitive shooters, elite law enforcement. They train for years to achieve the kind of performance you demonstrated last night. Are you saying I should take the corporate position? Clark shrugged. I'm saying you might want to find out just how far this ability of yours can go. Not many people get the chance to discover their true potential. That night, as Marcus drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, he found himself at a crossroads he'd never anticipated. A month ago, he'd been a directionless college dropout looking for steady work. Now he was being recruited for positions that could reshape his entire future. The corporate offer represented security, advancement, and the opportunity to develop abilities he was only beginning to understand. But Henderson's warnings echoed in his mind. With greater opportunities came greater dangers, and his natural talent might not be sufficient protection against the kind of threats he'd face in the corporate world. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus realized that his decision would determine not just his career path, but the kind of person he would become. The quiet young man who'd started this job was disappearing, replaced by someone with capabilities that demanded to be used. The question was whether he was ready for what that transformation might require of him. His mother was waiting up for him, as she often did after hearing about incidents at the facility. When he told her about the corporate offer, her reaction surprised him. Marcus, she said quietly, I've watched you struggle to find your place in the world for years. Last night you saved people and property without hurting anyone. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you've become. But what if I'm not ready for the responsibility? She smiled, the same expression she'd worn when he'd taken his first steps as a toddler. Honey, readiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you grow into. And from what I heard, you've already started growing. As Marcus fell asleep that morning, he found himself dreaming not of the past, but of possibilities he was only beginning to imagine. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same conference room where his journey had begun, but everything about his circumstances had changed. The corporate offer sat on the table before him, officially typed and signed, representing a future he could barely have imagined when he'd first walked through the security office doors. Captain Rodriguez sat across from him, along with Harrison and Chen, all waiting for his decision. But Marcus had insisted on one final meeting with the security team that had shaped his understanding of the profession. "Before I give you my answer," Marcus said, "I want to thank everyone who helped me get to this point." Stevens stepped forward first, his transformation from antagonist to supporter still remarkable to witness. "Thompson, I owe you more than an apology. I spent weeks trying to prove you didn't belong here, when I should have been helping you succeed. You've taught me something about recognizing potential, even when it comes in unexpected packages." Patterson nodded in agreement. "You showed us that natural ability is real, but more importantly, you showed us that character matters more than experience. The way you handled that situation, protecting property without destroying lives, that's the kind of security work we should all aspire to." Williams, who had been among Marcus's harshest critics, spoke with evident sincerity. "I've been in this business long enough to know that most people never get a chance to discover what they're truly capable of. You've got that chance now. Don't waste it." Henderson, who had become something of a mentor during Marcus's brief tenure, offered a different perspective. "The corporate world is going to challenge you in ways you can't imagine, but you've proven you can adapt, learn, and perform under pressure. Just remember that the most advanced training in the world can't replace good judgment and moral courage." Clark stepped forward with an envelope. "We took up a collection. Nothing fancy, just something to remember us by." Marcus opened the envelope to find a photograph of the entire security team, taken during a recent training exercise. On the back, someone had written, "To Marcus Thompson, the rookie who taught the veterans. May your aim always be true and your judgment always sound." The simple gesture hit him harder than all the formal recognition and corporate offers combined. These men, who had initially seen him as an unwelcome outsider, had become his colleagues and in some cases his friends. Rodriguez stood and extended his hand. "Marcus, in 30 years of security work, I've never seen a transformation like yours. Not just in ability, but in confidence and leadership. Whatever path you choose, you'll succeed. Thank you, Captain. All of you. This has been the most important month of my life." Harrison cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Thompson, while we appreciate the sentiment, we do need a decision today. The training program begins next month and there are preparations to be made." Marcus took a deep breath and looked around the room one final time. When he'd first arrived here, he'd been looking for nothing more than a steady paycheck and a sense of direction. What he'd found was a calling he never knew existed and abilities that demanded to be developed. "Mr. Harrison, Mr. Chen," he said formally, "I accept your offer." The corporate representative smiled with evident satisfaction. Chen opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Excellent. Your training will begin at our facility in Virginia. Advanced firearms instruction, tactical movement, executive protection protocols, threat assessment, and emergency medical training. It's an intensive 6-month program that will prepare you for the highest levels of corporate security work. The compensation package we discussed is all outlined here," Harrison added, sliding documents across the table. "Starting salary, benefits, advancement opportunities, and performance bonuses. You'll also receive a signing bonus to help with relocation expenses." Marcus glanced through the paperwork, still somewhat amazed by the financial figures. The signing bonus alone was more money than he'd ever seen in one place. "There is one condition," Chen said seriously. "The work you'll be training for requires absolute discretion. The clients you'll eventually protect are high-profile individuals who face genuine threats. Everything you learn, everyone you protect, every situation you encounter, it all stays confidential." "I understand," Marcus replied. Rodriguez stood and shook his hand again. "You've got my contact information. Stay in touch and let us know how the training goes. We'll be following your career with great interest." As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, Stevens approached Marcus one last time. "Thompson, I want you to remember something. What you've got isn't just about shooting accurately. It's about staying calm when everything around you is chaos, making the right decision when there's no time to think, protecting people without becoming the thing they need protection from. I'll remember that. And one more thing," Stevens added with a slight grin. When you're protecting some CEO from kidnappers or stopping international terrorists, remember that it all started with a bunch of smart-ass security guards who thought they knew everything. Marcus laughed. The first genuinely relaxed moment he'd experienced in weeks. I'll definitely remember that. 1 month later, Marcus found himself at a training facility that looked nothing like the industrial complex where his journey had begun. The Corporate Security Training Center was located on a sprawling campus in rural Virginia, complete with shooting ranges, tactical training buildings, and classrooms equipped with the latest technology. His fellow trainees were an impressive group: former military personnel, experienced law enforcement officers, and security professionals from around the world. Many had years of specialized training and operational experience. Marcus was once again the rookie in a room full of veterans, but this time he approached the situation with confidence rather than anxiety. The month at Meridian had taught him that natural ability, combined with dedication and good judgment, could overcome lack of experience. More importantly, he'd learned to trust his instincts and embrace challenges rather than fear them. The training was everything Harrison had promised: intensive, comprehensive, and demanding. Advanced marksmanship courses that pushed his abilities to new levels. Tactical movement training that taught him to navigate dangerous environments. Threat assessment classes that helped him understand the psychology of violence and aggression. But perhaps most valuable were the scenario-based exercises that put his skills to the test in realistic situations. Protecting a mock executive during a simulated kidnapping attempt. Responding to workplace violence scenarios. Conducting threat assessments for high-profile events. In each case, Marcus found that his natural calm under pressure served him well. While other trainees sometimes struggled with the stress and complexity of the scenarios, he experienced the same clarity and focus that had guided him during his first shooting qualification and his confrontation with the intruder. His instructors took notice quickly. Captain Morrison, a former Navy SEAL who ran the tactical training program, pulled him aside after a particularly challenging exercise. "Thompson, I've been training security personnel for 15 years. What you've got can't be taught. The question is whether you're going to develop it properly or let it go to waste." "What do you mean?" "I mean that natural ability without proper foundation is dangerous. You've got the instincts, but you need to understand the science behind what you're doing. Ballistics, tactical movement, threat assessment. These are disciplines with principles that need to be mastered." Morrison handed him a reading list that would have challenged a graduate student. "This is additional study material, not required, but recommended for someone with your potential." Marcus accepted the list gratefully. He'd learned that knowledge and preparation were the foundations that allowed natural ability to flourish safely. 6 months later, he graduated at the top of his training class, having mastered not just the technical skills required for corporate protection work, but the judgment and decision-making capabilities that separated true professionals from mere technicians. His first assignment was protecting the CEO of a technology company who'd been receiving credible death threats from a disgruntled former employee. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes situation that Henderson had warned him about: real danger, serious consequences, and the weight of someone else's life in his hands. As Marcus took his position outside the executive's office, scanning for potential threats and maintaining situational awareness, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. 18 months ago, he'd been a directionless college dropout with no clear future. Now he was a professional protector with abilities he was still learning to understand and use responsibly. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, periods of intense pressure, and constant challenges that forced him to grow beyond his comfort zone. But each step had revealed new capabilities and deeper understanding of his own potential. His radio crackled softly as his partner checked in from another position. The CEO was scheduled to leave for a public appearance in 20 minutes, and Marcus would be responsible for ensuring his safe passage through a crowd that might contain genuine threats. As he prepared for the assignment, Marcus felt the familiar calm settling over him. His breathing steadied, his awareness expanded, and his hand naturally found the reassuring weight of his service weapon. But now he understood that the weapon was just a tool. The real protection he provided came from his judgment, his training, and his unwavering commitment to putting others' safety before his own. The young man who'd been mocked as an incompetent rookie had become something he'd never imagined possible. A guardian whose very presence made the world a little safer for those who needed protection. And as he watched the CEO emerge from his office, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring, Marcus Thompson knew he'd finally found not just a job, but a calling that would define the rest of his life. The journey from ridiculed rookie to elite protector was complete, but Marcus understood that in many ways it was just the beginning. Each new assignment would bring fresh challenges, opportunities to grow and chances to prove that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of extraordinary things. Behind him, his radio crackled again as his team prepared to move out. Ahead lay another day of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, using abilities he was still discovering and skills he continued to develop. Marcus Thompson had found his place in the world, and the world was safer for it.